Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Daily English Lab podcast. So, you're in a meeting, your boss asks your opinion on a project. You present your idea, everyone goes silent for a second. Then someone says, "That's interesting." And in that moment, you think, great, they think it's interesting. They like it, right? Wrong. This is one of the most dangerous words in American English because interesting doesn't mean what you think it means. It's not a compliment. It's not even a neutral comment. It's actually code for something completely different. And if you don't understand what it actually means, you're going to misread situations constantly. You're going to think people like your idea when they don't. You're going to miss the real message hidden inside that single word. In this video, I'm decoding the hidden meaning of interesting and teaching you 5 other words Americans use the same way. Words that mean something totally different than they seem. Let's go. If you're new here, we're all about understanding English the way Americans actually speak it. Not textbook English, not the polite version, the real version. And today, we're talking about something that confuses English learners constantly: hidden meanings in casual American speech. Because Americans don't always say what they mean. And that's not dishonesty. That's just how communication works in American culture. You see, American culture values something specific: being nice and being efficient at the same time. So instead of being direct and harsh, Americans developed this system of coded language. Words that sound positive but actually communicate doubt, criticism, or disagreement. And the word interesting is the king of this. It's like the Swiss Army knife of vague criticism. Americans use it constantly, in meetings, in emails, in personal conversations. And most non-native speakers miss the real message completely. Here's why this matters to you. Understanding these hidden meanings is the difference between being an outsider to American culture and being an insider. It's the difference between misreading situations and actually understanding what's happening beneath the surface. When you understand what interesting really means, when you understand the whole system of these coded words, you suddenly become fluent not just in English grammar, you become fluent in American culture. And that's when people start treating you differently. You're not just someone who speaks English anymore. You're someone who gets it. So, here's what we're covering. First, we're decoding interesting in all its contexts, because the meaning changes depending on the situation. Second, we're looking at the other coded words Americans use that mean something totally different than they seem. Third, we're learning how to respond when someone uses these words on you, because knowing what they mean is only half the battle. Fourth, we're exploring why Americans do this, the cultural reasons behind this coded language. And fifth, we're looking at how this changes depending on who's speaking. Your boss means something different than your friend when they say interesting. This video is about 25 minutes, so really settle in. This is good stuff. And at the end, I'm going to ask you to practice something, and I want you to actually do it. Before we jump in, comment below and tell me, have you ever been in a situation where you misunderstood what an American meant? Where you thought they were giving you a compliment, but they were actually criticizing you? I want to hear your story. And as always, if this video helps you understand American English better, hit that like button and subscribe. Every subscription helps me create more videos like this. All right, let's decode what Americans really mean. Okay, so interesting is not one thing. It's actually 7 different things depending on the context. And that's why it's so confusing. Same word, completely different meanings. Let me break them down.
Meaning 1. I disagree, but I'm being polite. This is the most common one. Someone presents an idea. You say, "That's interesting." What you mean is, I disagree with this, but I don't want to say that directly, so I'm using a neutral word that sounds vaguely positive, but actually signals doubt. Example. Your colleague says, I think we should cut our marketing budget by 50%. You respond, that's an interesting approach. What you're not saying is, I think this is a good idea. What you are saying is, I think this is a bad idea, but I'm not going to tell you that directly. This is so common in American workplaces. People do it constantly to avoid conflict. Meaning 2. That's unusual. Sometimes interesting is code for weird or different or not what we normally do. Example. A tech company usually builds software for businesses. Someone suggests building consumer apps instead. The CEO says, that's an interesting direction for us. Translation, this is different from what we normally do, and I'm not sure if it's good or bad yet. This meaning is less judgmental than meaning 1, it's more neutral, but it's still signaling difference. Meaning 3, I wasn't expecting that. Sometimes interesting just means surprising, unexpected, like something caught you off guard. Example, you tell your American friend you're learning to play the bagpipes. They say, oh, that's interesting. Translation, I wasn't expecting you to say that. That's not what I thought you were into. This one is usually neutral, just acknowledging something unexpected. Meaning 4, I don't really understand what you mean. Sometimes interesting is a way of stalling, of buying time, of admitting confusion without actually admitting it. Example, someone explains a complicated technical concept. You say, that's really interesting. What you might mean is, I'm following about 40% of what you're saying, but I don't want to ask you to explain again. So I'm going to say this sounds interesting and hope we move on. This meaning is protective. You're protecting yourself from looking stupid. Meaning 5, that's actually pretty cool. Okay, sometimes interesting is actually positive. Sometimes Americans genuinely mean they find something interesting. Example, you tell someone about a book you read. They say, oh, that sounds interesting. What's it about? Translation, I actually want to know more about this. I find it genuinely interesting. The difference? They ask follow-up questions. They lean in. They want more information. Meaning 6, that's problematic, but I'm going to let someone else tell you. This is devious, and it happens in groups. Someone says something questionable. Someone else says, that's an interesting take, everyone. Translation, that joke was problematic, and I'm not going to explain why, but other people might. This meaning is passive-aggressive. Meaning 7, I'm shutting down this conversation. Sometimes interesting is a period at the end of a sentence. It's a way of ending a discussion without agreeing or disagreeing. Example, you and a coworker are debating something. You say your point. They say, well, that's interesting, and then they turn back to their work. Translation, I'm done with this conversation. I don't agree, but I'm not going to keep arguing. This meaning is a conversational exit strategy. Now, here's what's crazy about this. Natives use interesting without consciously thinking about which meaning they're using. It just comes out. And other natives automatically understand which meaning based on context. But you, as a learner, have to decode it. You have to figure out which of these 7 meanings applies. Common mistake? Learners assume interesting is always positive. So they think every time someone says it, they're giving a compliment. And then they're shocked when they find out later that people didn't like their idea. Another mistake is learners try to use interesting the same way, but they do it wrong. They use it too much or in situations where it doesn't fit and it sounds awkward. Mini story time? I had a student named Fatima from Egypt. She was interviewing for a job. The interviewer asked her about her experience. She explained her background. The interviewer said, "That's very interesting." And Fatima thought, "Great, they love my background." She was so relieved. Later, she didn't get the job, and she was confused. But I explained the interviewer was signaling doubt. They were questioning whether her experience matched what they needed. "That's very interesting" was actually a red flag, not a compliment. Fatima would have prepared a stronger explanation if she'd understood what interesting really meant in that context. Memory trick? Dukes. Okay, that's way too many letters and doesn't make sense. Let me try again. Actually, forget the acronym. Just remember, interesting is a Swiss Army knife. It does different things in different contexts. You have to read the context.
Practice moment. I want you to pause this video and think about the last time someone said interesting to you in English. What context were you in? Work? Social? Educational? Based on what we just covered, which of the 7 meanings do you think they meant? Write it down if you want. Get it concrete. Interactive question for comments. Tell me about a time when you misunderstood interesting. What did you think they meant versus what they actually meant? I want to hear your confusing moments. Okay, so now you understand interesting. But here's the thing. Interesting is just one word. Americans use about 5 other words the exact same way, and these words are causing confusion left and right. All right, so Americans didn't invent this code with just one word. They built an entire system, and these 5 words are all part of the same game. Let me decode each one. Word 1, nice. When Americans say nice, it doesn't mean good. It means, well, it depends. If someone says, you did a nice job, usually it's positive. It means you did okay. Maybe not amazing, but okay. But if someone says, that's a nice tie, with a certain tone, they might actually mean, that's not a tie I would choose, but I respect that you chose it. And here's the really sneaky version. That's nice, in response to an idea. Same as interesting. It's polite disagreement. Example, you suggest a business strategy. Someone says, that's nice. Translation, I don't think this is going to work, but I'm not going to argue about it. The key difference between nice and interesting? Nice is softer. Interesting implies more active disagreement. Nice is just dismissive. Common mistake? Learners think nice is always a compliment, so they're hurt when someone says their work is nice, and they realize it wasn't actually praise. Word 2, impressive. This one is tricky because sometimes it is a genuine compliment, but sometimes it's coded. Genuine compliment, you learned English in 3 years? That's impressive. But coded version, you tried to do X, Y, and Z all at the same time? That's impressive. This means, I think you're biting off more than you can chew. The difference, in the coded version, there's often an implication of too much or unrealistic. Example, a company proposes a project with an aggressive timeline. The board says, that's an impressive timeline. Translation, I don't think you can pull this off, but I admire your optimism. Word 3, creative. This is where things get really coded. Creative sounds like a compliment, but in American business, it's often the opposite. Because in business, creative often means unconventional, which means risky, which means I don't think this will work. Example, someone suggests an unusual marketing strategy. The executive says, that's really creative. Translation, this is different from what we normally do, and different is risky. So while I appreciate the creativity, I'm skeptical. In creative industries like advertising or design, creative might actually be a compliment. But in finance or conservative industries, it's coded for too unconventional. Word 4, bold. Bold is another word that sounds positive, but often isn't. Bold means you're taking a risk, and Americans use it to flag risky decisions. Example, a company decides to completely rebrand. The board says, that's a bold move. Translation, this could go really well or really badly. It's risky. But here's the thing, sometimes bold is a compliment. When it's genuine, people use it with admiration. But when it's coded, people use it with concern. The difference? Listen to the tone. If they say it with respect, it might be genuine. If they say it with hesitation, it's coded. Word 5, unique. Unique is maybe the most deceptive one, because unique sounds amazing, but in American English, especially in professional contexts, unique often means different in a way that might not work. Example, you present a proposal. Someone says, "That's a unique approach." Translation, "I've never seen anyone try this before, and I'm not sure if that's because it's innovative or because it doesn't work." Real unique compliment? "Your perspective is unique. I really respect how you see this differently." This usually comes with explanation and engagement. Coded unique? Just, "That's unique," with nothing else. That's a red flag. Now here's what all 5 of these words have in common. They're all vaguely positive words that Americans use to soften disagreement or doubt. They let Americans disagree without being disagreeable. It's like a layer of cultural padding. It protects the relationship while still communicating the real message for people who understand the code. Common mistake? Learners learn these words are compliments, so they use them as compliments. But then they sound awkward or fake because they're using them in situations where natives wouldn't use them. Another mistake, learners don't realize these words carry judgment, so they use them sincerely thinking they're being nice, but they're actually giving subtle criticism. Mini story. I had a student named Raj from India. He was working at a tech company. His boss said his code was interesting. Raj was happy, but later the boss rewrote the code completely, and Raj realized interesting meant the boss thought the code was problematic. He was gentle about it, but the message was there. If Raj had understood that interesting can be coded criticism, he would have asked for feedback directly instead of assuming it was positive.
Memory trick. NICBU. Nice, impressive, creative, bold, unique. 5 coded compliments. Remember that they're not always what they seem. Actually, here's a better way to remember. Think of them as the velvet words. They sound soft, but they often carry hidden steel. Practice moment. I want you to pause and think of a compliment someone gave you recently. Any of these 5 words included? Nice, impressive, creative, bold, or unique? Can you reinterpret it through this new lens? What might they have actually meant? In the comments, tell me, which of these 5 words confuses you the most? Which one do you hear and not know if it's a real compliment or coded criticism? Let me know. All right, so you know what these words mean now. But here's the million-dollar question. What do you do when someone says one of these words to you? How do you respond? Because responding correctly is actually an art form. Okay, this is where a lot of learners mess up. They understand the coded language, but then they respond to it wrong, and that makes things worse. So let me give you the playbook. Response strategy 1, the clarifying question. When someone says something coded, you can ask a clarifying question. This forces them to either explain themselves or walk back the criticism. Example, someone says your idea is interesting. You could say, "Thanks. What specifically do you find interesting about it?" Now they have to either A, give you specific feedback about what they actually like, or B, get flustered and explain what they really mean. Either way, you get actual information instead of coded language. This response is especially useful in professional settings. It's appropriate. It sounds curious, not defensive. Response strategy 2, the direct appreciation. Sometimes you respond to coded language by acting like you don't understand the code. You take it at face value and thank them for what could be a compliment. Example, someone says your project is bold. You say, "Thank you. I think it's worth taking some risks in this space." This does 2 things. It signals that you either don't understand the code, which might be true if you're non-native, or that you're confident enough to interpret the coded word positively. Either way, you're not reacting defensively. You're moving forward.
This works especially well in casual or social settings. Response strategy 3, the reflective pause. Sometimes the best response to coded language is nothing. Just a pause. Just acknowledging what they said without agreement or disagreement. You're just acknowledging that something was said. This works when you're not sure what they mean and you need more information before you respond. Response strategy 4, the follow-up conversation. Sometimes you don't respond in the moment. You wait. You think about what they said. And then later, you have a follow-up conversation. Example, your boss says your presentation was interesting. You think about it, and the next day you go to them and say, "Hey, I was thinking about our conversation yesterday. I'd love your feedback on how I could improve my presentation." This takes the coded language and makes it explicit. You're asking for feedback directly instead of trying to decode their vague comment. This is actually the most effective strategy for professional development because it gets you real information. Response strategy 5, the mirror response. This is more advanced, but it works. You respond to coded language with coded language in return. Example, someone says your idea is interesting. You say, "I appreciate that. Your thoughts on how we could approach this differently would be really helpful." Translation, I know you don't like my idea, I'm acknowledging that, and now I'm asking you to be specific about your alternative. This only works if you're comfortable with the nuance because it's sophisticated. You're matching their level of indirectness. Now, here's the key. Different contexts need different responses. In a casual social setting, the direct appreciation or reflective pause works. In a professional meeting, clarifying question or follow-up conversation works. In a group setting, sometimes mirror response works, but be careful. Don't sound defensive. Common mistake. People respond defensively to coded language. Someone says their idea is interesting and they immediately launch into defending their idea. No, actually, it's not just interesting, it's actually pretty innovative. This makes you sound insecure. It signals that you understood the coded message and you're upset about it. Better approach, stay calm, stay curious, don't defend. Just ask questions or acknowledge without agreeing. Another mistake. People use the wrong response strategy for the context. They use a mirror response in a casual setting and it sounds pretentious. Or they use direct appreciation in a professional meeting where feedback actually matters and it sounds like they're not taking the work seriously. Mini story. I had a student named Sophie from France. Her American colleague said her work was creative. Sophie was proud. She thought it was a compliment. But later, she noticed the colleague kept giving her very detailed feedback, very specific corrections. And Sophie realized creative meant unconventional, which meant the colleague was trying to help her fit in better with the team style. Sophie didn't understand the coded message until too late. If she'd asked a clarifying question right away, she would have understood sooner. Memory trick. CCDFRM. Clarifying question, direct appreciation, clarifying, follow-up, reflective, mirror. Okay, that doesn't work at all. Let me try it differently. 5 response strategies. Pick the one that fits your context. Are you in a casual setting or professional? Are you getting direct feedback or a casual comment? Let your context guide your response. Practice moment. I want you to think of a coded comment you received. Interesting, nice, creative, whatever. Now, which response strategy would have worked best in that situation? If it's casual, social, maybe direct appreciation would have been good. If it's professional and important, maybe clarifying question or follow-up conversation. Play it through in your head. How would that conversation have gone? In the comments, tell me, have you ever received a coded comment and responded well? Or have you responded badly? What happened? I want to hear how you navigated this. All right, so you know what the coded words mean now. You know how to respond to them. But here's the deeper question. Why do Americans even do this? Why not just be direct?
Okay, so this is where understanding goes from tactical to strategic. Because if you understand why Americans do this, you'll understand so much more about American culture.
And the answer has to do with something called the American value of niceness. American culture values being nice, like really values it. But it also values being efficient and direct. And these two values are in conflict. You can't always be both nice and direct at the same time. So what did Americans do? They created a system of coded language that lets you be both. With coded language, you're communicating the real message, the direct part, but you're packaging it in a nice way, the nice part. So when your boss says your idea is interesting instead of, I don't think this will work, they're being direct, you get the message, but they're also being nice. They're not attacking you. Here's a real cultural comparison. In some countries, like Germany or Japan, people tend to be more indirect in a different way. They might avoid giving criticism at all. They change the subject. But Americans give criticism dressed up in compliments. Interesting instead of bad idea. Creative instead of too unconventional. Bold instead of risky. It's criticism with a smile. And here's the important part. Americans don't see this as dishonest. They see it as professional, as respectful, as maintaining the relationship while still communicating the real message. If an American said exactly what they meant without the coded language, other Americans would think they were rude, aggressive, lacking professionalism. But if they use coded language, it's seen as skilled communication, as mature. So, coded language isn't a bug in American culture, it's a feature. It's a highly developed skill that natives learn growing up. But here's what's interesting. Different levels of American society use coded language differently. In corporate America, heavily coded. Lots of interesting, creative, unique. In creative industries like comedy or some tech companies, less coded, more direct. In academic settings, super coded. Professors are masters of polite criticism. In casual friendships, sometimes coded, sometimes direct, depending on the friendship. So context matters a lot. Another cultural reason? Americans value not embarrassing people. If someone makes a mistake or suggests something bad, you don't want to embarrass them in front of others. So instead of saying, "That's a terrible idea," you say, "That's an interesting approach," which signals disagreement but doesn't publicly shame the person. It's actually kind of considerate when you think about it. They're protecting your social dignity even while disagreeing with you. But here's the flip side. This coded language creates confusion for non-natives because you're taught to take English literally, to believe what people say. When someone says, "That's nice," you think they mean it's nice. You don't understand that they might mean it's not nice, but they're being polite. And that's where the confusion comes from. Mini story. I was in a meeting once with a non-native speaker. American manager says, "That's an interesting approach." The non-native speaker lights up, smiles, thinks they crushed it. But I knew better. I could read the room. The manager was skeptical. And sure enough, the project got rejected. And the non-native speaker was shocked. They said, "But the manager said it was interesting." And I had to explain, in American, interesting in that context meant doubt, not approval. That person would have been so much better off if they'd understood the cultural coding system. So here's the meta lesson. Learning American English isn't just about learning words and grammar. It's about learning the cultural operating system, the invisible rules. And coded language is one of the biggest invisible rules. Common mistake? Learners think coded language is dishonest. They think Americans are being two-faced. Why don't they just say what they mean? But that's viewing it through your own cultural lens. In American culture, coded language is seen as polite and professional, not two-faced. Another mistake? Learners try to adopt coded language before they understand their own language. They start saying interesting when they disagree, but they do it wrong. They sound awkward or fake. Because using coded language correctly requires nuance. It requires understanding context. It requires native-level comfort with ambiguity. So don't try to copy coded language until you really understand it. Memory trick, CAD. Culture, avoid embarrassment, directness without rudeness. That's why Americans use coded language. Interactive question. In your culture, how do people give criticism? Are they direct? Indirect? Do they use coded language? And how does it compare to what we're seeing in American culture? Tell me in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about cultural differences. All right, so now you understand coded language culturally, but here's one more thing. How does this actually change based on who's speaking to you? Here's something crucial that a lot of people miss. Coded language doesn't mean the same thing coming from your boss versus your friend. It doesn't mean the same thing in a group setting versus one-on-one. The same word carries different weight depending on who says it. Boss says interesting. When your boss says your idea is interesting, it's a warning sign. It usually signals doubt, concern. The higher up the hierarchy, the more coded the language tends to be. Because bosses have power, and power plus criticism can feel harsh. So bosses often use coded language to soften the blow. What to do? Ask for specific feedback. I appreciate that. Can you help me understand what specific concerns you have? This gets them to be explicit. Peers says interesting. When a coworker at your level says your idea is interesting, it might mean disagreement, but it's also less loaded. You're equals, so the dynamic is different. Sometimes it's genuine. I find that interesting. Tell me more. Sometimes it's coded disagreement, but less serious, less political. What to do? You have more room to push back or ask questions. You can be less formal. Friend says something is interesting. When a friend says something is interesting, it's often actually positive, or at worst, it's playful disagreement. Friends are less likely to use coded language heavily. They're more direct. The coded language system is primarily a professional tool. Group setting versus one-on-one. Here's another crucial distinction. Coded language is often more coded in group settings. Why? Because when others are watching, people are more careful, more concerned with how it looks. In one-on-one, someone might say directly, "I don't think this will work." But in a group, they're more likely to say, "That's an interesting approach," because they're thinking about how it sounds to everyone else. So if you're at a meeting with 10 people and someone says your idea is interesting, that's probably more serious than if they said it one-on-one. Written versus spoken. One more distinction. Coded language in email is often even more coded than in person. Why? Because email is documented, it's permanent, so people are extra careful. An email that says, "That's an interesting proposal, and I'd like to discuss some concerns," is probably more serious than someone saying the same thing face-to-face. Because in email, there's no tone of voice, no facial expression, so the words have to carry all the meaning. So here's the pyramid of coded language intensity. At the bottom, casual friend conversation, spoken, positive tone. In the middle, coworker conversation, one-on-one, professional tone. Toward the top, boss conversation, group setting, professional tone. At the very top, boss email, negative implication, documented and permanent. The higher you go on that pyramid of intensity, the more carefully you need to decode. Common mistake? People treat all uses of coded language the same way. They hear interesting and they panic, whether it's a friend or their boss. But context matters. A friend saying, "That's interesting," is usually just curiosity. A boss saying it might signal real concern. Another mistake, people assume that the same person always uses coded language the same way. But actually, People adjust their communication based on context. The same person might be direct in a casual conversation, but coded in a formal meeting. Mini story. I had a student named Kenji from Japan. His American manager was usually pretty direct, told him exactly what he thought. But in a team meeting, the manager said Kenji's proposal was interesting. Kenji thought, oh, this manager is different now. They're being coded. But actually, the manager was just being appropriate for the context. In a group, you use more coded language to protect the dynamics. One-on-one, you can be more direct. If Kenji had understood this, he wouldn't have been confused. Memory trick. PBGEW. Person, bosses, peers, group, email, written. How do these things change the meaning of coded language? Actually, that's too complicated. Just remember, higher the stakes, more coded the language. Boss plus group plus email equals maximum coding. Practice moment. Think of someone in your life who uses coded language with you. Could be a boss, a friend, a teacher. Now, think about how they communicate in different contexts. Do they use coded language more in groups? Less when you're alone? Start noticing these. Interactive question. In the comments, tell me, who in your life uses the most coded language? Your boss, a colleague, someone else? What coded words do they use most often? All right, we've covered a lot. Let me recap the most important mistakes people make when dealing with coded language.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to highlight the 3 mistakes that keep people stuck misunderstanding American communication. Mistake number 1, treating coded language as actual feedback. This is huge. Learners hear interesting and they think that is the feedback. They don't realize they still need actual information. So they walk away thinking they got feedback, but they didn't. They got a signal that they need to ask for feedback. Example, your boss says your presentation was interesting. You thank them and think you're done. But actually, you still don't know what they thought was wrong or right. The mistake, treating the coded word as the feedback instead of treating it as a signal to ask for feedback. The fix? When you hear coded language, treat it as a starting point, not an ending point. Follow up, ask questions, get specifics. Mistake number 2, taking coded language personally. Some learners hear coded language and immediately think, they don't like me, I failed, I'm not good enough. They internalize it emotionally before they even decode what it means. But coded language isn't personal, it's professional. It's not about you as a person, it's about your work or your idea. Your boss says your proposal is interesting, doesn't mean you're not interesting. It means your proposal needs more thought. The fix? Separate the comment from your worth as a person. Coded language is just language, it's a communication tool, not a judgment on you. Mistake number 3, trying to be coded before you understand it. Some learners learn about coded language and immediately start trying to use it. Oh, I should say interesting when I disagree. But they do it wrong. They use it at the wrong times, or they overuse it, and it sounds fake. Because coded language requires nuance. It requires knowing your context, your relationship, your power dynamic. It requires native intuition. If you try to use it before you really understand it, you'll sound awkward or manipulative or insincere. The fix? First, understand it. Decode it when you hear it. Get comfortable receiving it. Only after you're really comfortable with it should you start trying to use it yourself. And even then, use it sparingly, use it professionally, use it respectfully. So here's the summary. Don't treat coded language as feedback, don't take it personally, and don't use it until you really understand it. All right, let's lock in what you've learned today. Takeaway 1. Interesting has 7 different meanings. Disagreement, unusual, confusion, genuinely interesting, problematic, shut down, or something unexpected. Same word, different meanings, depending on context. Takeaway 2, interesting is just one of 5 coded words. Nice, impressive, creative, bold, and unique all work the same way. They sound like compliments,
but often signal doubt or criticism. Takeaway 3. How you respond matters. Using clarifying questions, direct appreciation, reflected pauses, follow-up conversations, or mirror responses. Different contexts need different strategies. Takeaway 4. There's a cultural reason for this. Americans value being nice and being direct. Coded language lets them do both. It's professional, not dishonest. Takeaway 5. The same word means different things from different people. Coded language from your boss is different from coded language from your friend. Coded language in a group is different from one-on-one. Coded language in email is different from spoken. So here's what I want you to do. Don't just watch this video and forget it. Start noticing coded language in your own conversations. When someone says interesting or nice or creative, pause. Think about which of the meanings applies. Decode it. Respond appropriately. Only after you're really comfortable with that should you think about using it yourself. And even then, use it sparingly, use it professionally, use it respectfully. So here's the summary. Don't treat coded language as feedback, don't take it personally, and don't use it until you really understand it. You're not just speaking English anymore. You're reading between the lines. You're fluent in American culture, not just grammar. And that's a whole different level. All right, we're at the end, but this is really just the beginning of your understanding of American communication. You now know what Americans really mean when they say, interesting. You know the other coded words. You know how to respond. You know why Americans do this. And you know how context changes everything. So here's what I need from you. First, hit that like button. It tells me this content resonated with you, and it helps other English learners find this video. Second, subscribe if you haven't already, because next week, we're diving into another layer of American communication. What Americans mean when they don't say anything. Silence, pauses, and what those mean in different contexts. Third, comment below. Tell me, what's the most useful thing you learned today? Was it understanding the 7 meanings of interesting? Learning the other coded words? Understanding the cultural reason? I want to hear what clicked for you. And fourth, if you know someone who's confused by American communication, send them this video, because this understanding needs to spread. Here's the truth. Americans aren't trying to be confusing. They're trying to be polite. Once you understand that, you can decode the message underneath the nice words. So next time someone says your idea is interesting, you'll know exactly what they mean, and you'll know exactly how to respond. You've got this. See you tomorrow.